You have mail. Pastor Jeff, we never finished reading last week's Christmas card from the Church of Philippi. Don't worry, though. I found it under a stack of books in your office. Also, you have a lot of books. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ. Oh, God. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. When I was growing up, my best friend Tim could be made to laugh if I just made eye contact with him and said, "Giggle attack." I have a feeling that would work on Pete there too, yeah. That's all right. Laughter is actually quite a fine setting for today. Now, Advent is far, 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 far from being about me. But I do have to share that last night I accomplished a lifelong goal. I was, for 15 glorious minutes, a professional comedian. And yes, that is AJ's, back of AJ's head there in the photo. And just, I want to say, we're all so grateful that at the candy cane factory explosion, that only AJ's hair was impacted, right? Just. Yeah. So my first professional stand-up gig, but don't worry, I am not quitting my day job yet. I was paid $50 to make jokes at last night's Comedy for a Clause at the Vine and Tap in Dublin, Ohio. And Bree tells me that that's not quite enough to make our mortgage. I've spent a lot of time lately thinking about my avocation as a comedian and my vocation as a pastor. On the one hand, it might be viewed as an escape. That thing I do on the side, a moonlighting gig that is valuable precisely because it isn't ministry. And there might be some of this to that, but then there's the other hand. On the other hand, for me, comedy, and more specifically laughter, is a gateway to joy. And joy, as the Philippians remind us in their Christmas card this morning, is part of our very lives with the Lord. Part of what makes the Philippians letter so beautiful is the laughter that is hidden just beneath the surface of those words. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Even the very shape that some of those words make your mouth take is kind of a smile. You can't say the re of rejoice without your lips curling into a bit of a grin. And more importantly, this command to rejoice only works if joy is already present. I mean, have you ever tried to command someone to be happy? Has any parent successfully said, "You go to your room until you're laughing, dang it. Don't you come out till you're grinning, I mean it." No, that's impossible. So I take this call to rejoice as an affirmation of a pre-existing condition. Like when a friend says to you, "Oh, I've got some good news, and then she tells you something that happened, and you respond with, that is good news. She doesn't go, yeah, I know, that's what I started with. No, we do that. We do that call and response sort of thing. So this command to rejoice, I think, is because joy already exists. So for me, laughter becomes a way to condition the soul for joy. To be sure, it is not the same thing as joy, but it is good prep work for it. And because our passage has this joy already spiraling throughout it, the passage comes across with a sort of non-anxious sense of security. Now, security is hard to come by, and non-anxious security is nearly impossible. Think about our lives. How much of our lives are spent coping with or covering over our insecurities? We overfunction at work because we're insecure that our livelihood is always just one round of strategic layoffs away from disappearing. We perpetually feel like our bank accounts have insufficient funds, even if we've been doing all right for a while now. In fact, insufficient is a good word for what so often plagues us. Insufficient funds scare us. Insufficient relationships leave us feeling lonely, no matter how many likes our last Facebook post got. The fear of insufficient space has caused us to do everything from wonder if we should buy a new home to detain refugees at the border for fear that our society doesn't have room for them. And this, of course, should remind us that Jesus was born where he was born because of insufficient space. Yet of all the insufficiencies that gnaw at our souls, insufficient joy maybe threatens the most, precisely because joyful people rarely find room for worry in their lives. So why are the Philippians able to be joyful while the rest of the world acts so dreadful? What is the secret of their joy while so often insufficiency lurks around every corner for us? How do they evade the grasp of worry? The answers are found as we read into and read on in our Christmas card from them, beginning especially with the wonderful Advent reminder, the Lord is near. Now, the Christmas card we received from our cousin Isaiah reminds us what life was like before the Lord was near, but was written with a certain hope that he would be. It speaks of that day, that is the day when the Lord comes. On that day, we are told, there is no fear. Our strength will return to us like the first day of feeling normal after battling the flu. On that day, our salvation is secure, like drawing water up from a once dry well after a long drought. The Philippians' joy abounds because the promises of Isaiah have become their daily reality. The Lord is near, and ours is now a life of giving thanks and singing praises. Yet the reasons for their rejoicing extends even further as they go on. In everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. Our God hears our prayers and attends to our requests. Whereas the world just so often cries into the void, the Philippians rejoice because they are heard. And being heard is important. In a lot of my counseling work as a pastor, I find more than half of it is just listening. For the past 3 months, I've been volunteering as a spiritual care provider through Lower Lights Christian Health Center here in Marysville, the same Lower Lights where our most recent pulpit supply, Thomas Fletcher, works as community outreach coordinator. 3 Thursdays out of the month, I show up, I pray through some prayer request cards, and then I call folks who have requested counseling. More often than not, my primary job is just to listen. People who are struggling with their health, their addiction, their finances, their families, they just want to know that someone else knows their struggles. They want to be heard. They need to be heard. I suspect the Philippians are so joyful because they've learned to take their concerns to God, who is always quick to listen, ready to be present in the midst of whatever bothers or plagues. The Philippians have discovered that the advent of Jesus means that they are no longer and never alone. As a result of God's nearness, because he is attentive to their prayers, they experience a peace that surpasses all understanding and a security that guards both hearts and minds. And by heart, I think we should metaphorically hear a peace that keeps the anxious palpitations of insufficiency from creating a cardiac crisis in our lives. By heart, we hear the center of our very lives now defined by peace and not anxiety. And when the Philippians tell of their minds being guarded, we understand this to mean minds that are no longer worrying over whether there's room enough for the refugee, funds enough for retirement, or whether our relationships are thick enough to sustain us even in our worst moments. Once we see all of this peace and security, all the nearness and attentiveness of God, it is no wonder that the Philippians' lips curl into smiles and songs of praise issue forth with peals of laughter. What else could result from all of this except joy? What other sound is fitting to this reality than laughter? Of course, not all laughter is made equal. To be sure, we have phrases like gallows humor, precisely because sometimes laughter is just our best defense mechanism against pain and poverty. Crude jokes are made in order to withstand the bitter realities of crude conditions. I mean, when the noose is around your neck and the hangman has his hand on the switch, you might as well make a joke. I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? They're not going to laugh? Because of my little foray into stand-up comedy, I've been thinking a lot about comedy and laughter. I've been thinking about my own history with it. I can see, with the benefit of years, that I was drawn to stand up because I often felt down. Comedy and comedians seemed to embody a happiness that wasn't always present in my life. I also quickly found that if I could make people laugh, they would like me. This is, after all, the sad desperation that hides behind every crying clown. But lately, my relationship to humor and laughter has been changing. Maybe I can even say the Lord is redeeming it. I'm increasingly finding that I don't want to make jokes so that people like me, but rather so that they love life. I think the difference is a switch from gallows humor to mirth. Mirth is a condition of merriment, like friends gathered in a warm room with just enough beer and wine in their bellies to convince each other that they really are witty. Now, I realize it's trendy amongst some grizzled Christians to publicly enforce the phrase Merry Christmas rather than the secularized Happy Holidays. And they do this because they want to urge the primacy of Christ in Christmas. And I get this. I do. But I think the sacrifice of merry for happy is nearly as troubling as the loss of Christ from Christmas. Because our world seeks happiness in any number of lonely ways, but merriment is always preconditioned by love. And I will know that you have taken this sermon to heart if I see you call someone out on social media for not saying Merry Holidays. Mirth, merriment, laughter, these are the byproducts of joy. Joy that the Lord is near. Joy that you can take every concern to God and it is heard for what it is. Joy that Isaiah's on that day has been born into our midst and our salvation has been secured, even our comedy redeemed. Finally, joy has this ability to build, construct, produce. Like a chia pet you received from your uncle because he just doesn't know you very well. It sprouts into something more. This, by the way, this aspect of joy, the way it can produce and grow, this is one of the reasons that I love, in particular, improv comedy. Well, I haven't done any yet, though it could easily be my next ambition. Improv comedy works by accepting and playfully building on whatever the last person said. The recurring phrase in improv is always, yes, and. The Philippians are joyful because they brought their prayers and their supplications to the Lord who is near and have heard his laughing reply, yes, and. So they give more, and he gives more. They praise, he shines. They pray, he moves. They rest in merriment, he warms them in love. Friends, this is the good news for us today. All that the Philippians experience is ready and available to us. All of it comes with the advent of our Christ. We have a God who is living in a yes and relationship with each and every one of us. So how can we do anything other than rejoice? What sound is more befitting our lives than laughter? Our joy is always, again is our joy. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.